Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special hash rate. Today, I'm going to take you through Stillcore's latest report, State of Tao, January 2026. Now, this report is available as a PDF. Anyone can download it from stillcorecapital.com, and I'll put the link to the PDF in the show notes in case you want to grab it that way. So to begin at the beginning, as the famous playwright Dylan Thomas said at the beginning of his play Under Milkwood, what is Bittensor? Well, like early Bitcoin, Bittensor is pretty hard to explain to newcomers, but the explanations and the metaphors have gotten better over time. So let's just take it from the top. Imagine that instead of forming a company or a division within a company, instead of doing that, you make a list of tasks. Freelancers, some with PhDs from all over the world, compete to finish each task for you the best. So it's a contest, and only the best of these freelancers get paid. You have to win to earn. But they're not paid by you. They're paid by a Bitcoin-like blockchain. That, in a nutshell, is Bittensor. And if you think about it, if this sounds familiar, well, that's exactly how Bitcoin mining operates. There's no company, there's no employees, there's no president of Bitcoin. Instead, there's only a task: find the hash of the previous block. And it's a contest. Whoever finds the hash first gets paid newly minted Bitcoins by the Bitcoin chain itself. There's no invoices, there's no payroll, there's no HR department. The chain pays whoever won the contest. The result of this way of doing things led to Bitcoin's incredible success. So it created $2.5 trillion worth of value over about 17 years. And it also created Earth's largest supercomputer in aggregate. It's 500 times larger than its nearest competitor. So Bittensor took a look at this and said, this task contest mining idea worked exceedingly well once. Maybe it can be replicated across multiple AI and other domains. So Bittensor takes Bitcoin's core mining idea and expands it. Bittensor makes mining programmable. So what exactly are we mining for in Bittensor? Well, there are currently 128 separate task contests within Bittensor, and these contests are all called subnets. Now, each subnet has an owner. Sometimes it's a company, sometimes it's an individual, and the subnet owner defines what the subnet is mining for and how the contest works. Now, each subnet mines for a different thing. So I'm going to give you 4 examples out of the 128. So Ridge's Subnet 62 mines for AI-powered coding assistants capable of rivaling Claude and Cursor. So yes, it is a vibe coding platform. And in standardized testing, the SWE benchmark and other tests, Ridge's Subnet 62 is actually exceeding the centralized competition. And they are, in fact, going after very soon now with a full-fledged product. They are going to start competing with these very large multi-billion-dollar companies. 404 Gen Subnet 17 mines for AI-created text to 3D objects. So enter in text, it makes a 3D object for you. And in a very short time, in less than a year, 404 Gen Subnet 17 has amassed Earth's largest library of 3D objects because they're all AI generated. There's 25 million objects in their library. Nova Subnet 68 mines for new pharmaceutical molecules. And finally, Templar Subnet 3 and IOTA Subnet 9 are both taking different approaches at the same thing. They're both decentralized AI training networks. So, if you want to make a new frontier AI model like Grok or like ChatGPT, you have to have something like on the order of 200,000 GPUs that are in one giant training rig. Elon Musk calls his training rig Colossus. So both of these subnets are effectively a Napsterized, decentralized version of the same thing. And they're looking at, actually going toe to toe eventually and competing with these very large centralized training centers. So as you can see, these 4 things are very serious things, right? They're not meme coins. They're not fly-by-night things. They're high-powered attempts at very important things. Now, in Bitcoin, the contest to find the hash of the previous block basically boils down to guessing the number of gumballs in a jar. And the more computational power you have, the more rapid fire guesses you have. So the more lottery tickets you have, right? So the ability to compete and sometimes win proves that the miner is burning electricity and compute. And Bitcoin calls this proof of work, right? It proves that you've got the iron needed to compete. Now, while this is very useful for cryptographically securing the Bitcoin network, the actual work of guessing gumballs is itself very wasteful. By contrast, as you can see from the example subnets above that we just previously covered, the work done in Bittensor mining contest is actually very useful. And Bittensor calls this proof of useful work. So let's recap Bittensor's value proposition to subnet owners and miners. The value proposition to the subnet owner. So there's no employee recruiting, right? Just like Bitcoin. Anyone can join the network and mine. You're not limited by your geography. Again, just like Bitcoin, right? Anyone, anywhere on Earth can mine. So that means that the best brains and the best talent, if it's in India, if it's in Pakistan, if it's anywhere on Earth, it can join your mining network. There's no invoices or salaries. So if you're a subnet owner, you don't have to hire anyone. There's no HR department. There's no contracts. There's no firing of people, right? So just people come and go as they please. The chain pays the miners, not you. And this is an important point. You're effectively being subsidized by the chain. So you as a subnet can produce a product with this mining that you can then turn around and sell. But you don't have to pay the miners. The chain pays the miners. The best minds and GPU on the planet compete on your task, right? Because, there's a lot of very smart people who are actually, working at Facebook or Google or ChatGPT. And some of these people are actually at night mining Bittensor subnets because they can actually make some significant money. So the top subnets are paying out between 50 and 75K per day to their top miners. Now you have to win to get that. And that's not typical, right? That's the best. The best of the best can get that. But some of these people are the best of the best. And if they realize how much money they can make, you can amass $1 million worth of tokens in a week. So it is possible to do it, and some people have. So that tends to attract the best minds and the most powerful GPU that just sort of sitting around doing nothing, right? Like Uber cars, right? Cars that were sitting around doing nothing. When they discovered they could join the Uber network and make money in their downtime, a lot of them decided to do it. Same thing is true here. Some GPU that's, fallow for whatever reason can now start mining Bittensor. Only miners who produce get paid anything. So there's no dead weight. So in your company, we've all worked at companies where there are employees who are dead weight, who aren't, who aren't competent or as competent as the best people. There's no incompetence here. Only the best get paid anything. So the value proposition to the subnet miner. So if you're on the other side, if you're mining, this is what the world looks like from your point of view. So you can work anywhere on Earth independently. So you don't have to be in Silicon Valley. You don't have to be in New York. You can be in India, right? Or you could be anywhere. And you work independently. You're your own boss. From your side, there's no contract. There's no chasing people down to pay invoices. And the chain pays you, and it pays you immediately. So there's no waiting to get paid. As soon as you win a contest, you get paid immediately. Again, just like in Bitcoin, right? If you solve the hash for the previous block before anyone else, you get paid immediately as a Bitcoin miner. This is the same thing. As I said, you can make up to 75K in a single day, so pretty interesting to some people. Most open source things that you contribute to do not have an ownership layer. This one does. So you earn ownership in the subnet via subnet tokens. So when you're a miner and you're mining for the subnet, you might the way you're rewarded is not in Tao tokens directly. You're rewarded in that subnet's tokens. I'm going to get into what all this means in a second. But that gives you, which you can then trade. You can then trade those tokens directly into Tao immediately if you want. And then you can take that Tao to a centralized exchange and cash that out into dollars, into your actual bank account if you want to do that. However, you can also opt to hold on to the subnet tokens. And let's say you amassed 100K, right? Or so worth of subnet tokens when that subnet was only worth $10 million, right? Down that road, that subnet becomes worth $1 billion. So, that 100K, that would be 100X, right? So you got it when it was worth 10 million, you had 100K worth of it. So that's 100 times 100, you've made some very significant money off of, maybe a couple days worth of work. So a lot of these miners are tending to hang on to their subnet tokens because it gives them ownership, and it's their option. They don't have to. They're not locked up in any way. They can sell immediately if they want to. So this atomization of the company, if you will, by Bittensor is a new way to collect the best human and digital commodities to address a specific market, and it's already had very stunning results. Okay, now let's talk about the Tao token and the subnet tokens that I was just referencing previously. So the primary token of Bittensor is called Tao. Like Bitcoin, there will only ever be 21 million Tao tokens. And there were 10,500,000 Tao in circulation as of the day I wrote this paper, which was a couple of weeks ago when I did the first draft of it. So it was in December, but it's pretty much the same right now. And on top of that, each of the 128 subnets also has its own token. Now, you, regular person out there who's not a miner, you can invest in subnets by buying the subnet token. Now, here's a little note. Technically, one stakes Tao with the Bittensor chain and receives a subnet token, so it's not really buying in the sense that it's not the same thing as when you buy a token on Ethereum or Solana, although it feels very similar. And for simplicity, I will be referring to staking Tao for subnet tokens as buying, just because it's easier to talk about. It's easier to explain things that way. So the big takeaway here is you can think of the subnets, each of the 128 subnets, as 128 AI startups that you can invest in. Now, each subnet has a market cap. As of this writing, subnet market caps range from a few $100,000 to $100 million, with most of the 128 subnets somewhere in the $2 million to $10 million range. Now, this is conceptually similar to the ERC20 tokens that exist on top of Ethereum. But here's where it's very, very different. To get a subnet token, you must stake Tao. And what this means is that subnet tokens are rehypothecated Tao under the hood. Again, this is very unlike Ethereum or Solana, where ERC20 or SPL tokens are built on top of the base chain and are economically separate from the gas token, in other words, the ETH and the SOL. And in fact, the gas token competes with the app token for valuation in most cases. Now, this is not so on Bittensor. Subnet tokens and Tao are simply two versions of the same thing. And this means that when subnet market caps rise, value is always driven back into the underlying Tao token. So the safest thing you can do is just own Tao. And it's sort of like owning the S&P 500, right? It's sort of like an index fund of how all the subnets are doing. And if any of them take off like a bat out of hell, the Tao token will also do very well, right? Because they're mathematically sort of chained together at the hip like that. Now, if instead of holding Tao, you choose to hold subnet tokens, if you choose the right subnet, one that appreciates in value, you will get more Tao back when you cash out your subnet tokens. However, if you choose the wrong subnet, one which experiences depreciation, you will get less Tao back when you cash out your subnet tokens, right? So you can basically bet on subnets individually, or you can bet on the whole ecosystem via Tao. That's the big takeaway there. So in a certain sense, all subnets are part of a Tao Keiretsu. They are at once separate and distinct, but they are united by a super entity, a base token that aligns them all. And if any Bittensor subnet does well, it will benefit the Tao token. But holding that specific subnet token instead of Tao will be much more beneficial. Okay, so everything within Bittensor is contests within contests to win new Tao. Remember, Bittensor takes Bitcoin's mining side and makes that programmable, right? So what are we programming for? Well, we're basically creating these contests so that people can win new Tao. Now, every day, 3,600 Tao is minted by the Bittensor chain, right? Which is exactly what happens with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin chain also mints new Bitcoin every day. This new Bitcoin is handed out to whoever wins the mining contests. Now, subnets compete with each other to get their share of the 3,600 Tao minted by the Bittensor chain every day. Now, within each subnet, right, so the subnets are all competing with each other, and I'll get into how that works in a second. But within each subnet, all the miners are competing against each other to get a share of whatever Tao the subnet is getting, right? So if your subnet got 50% of the Tao, let's just say, 50% of all of the Tao that's emitted that day are up for grabs for the people, the miners that are in that subnet. So contest within contests is very Darwinian. It's very Hunger Games. And it is merciless. The weakest subnets and the weakest miners are regularly culled by the chain. Your right to be a subnet or right to mine is rescinded for poor performance or inactivity. And like Bitcoin, miners can join or leave anytime. It's open to anyone, anywhere on Earth. For this reason, some call Bittensor an open economy. Others call this incentivism. We call it the most ferocious form of capitalism yet invented. Everyone competes always. Only the most excellent get anything. And everyone is reevaluated continuously. You cannot rest. What you did yesterday does not matter today. It's, what have you done for me lately? That is what the Bittensor chain is saying to all participants at all times. Companies have dead weight. We've all been there. Employees who successfully hide while collecting a salary. Not so in Bittensor. Every day is a new gladiatorial round, and every day each subnet and each miner must fight anew for their share. Okay, so let's talk now about the subnets. What are they? The heart of Bittensor is a collection of 128 subnets. Now, this number will increase in the future, but it is capped at 128 for now. Most of these subnets are AI related. Not all of them, but most of them are. You can think of subnets as early stage startups that anyone can invest in. We touched on this earlier, but here is a more complete list of highlighted subnets. And as you will see, these are all serious projects. They're not meme coins. Many are extremely technical, and some are aimed at directly challenging some of the world's largest companies. Okay, let's start off with Shoots, Subnet 64. So Shoots provides inference. What that means is that their miners are supplying GPU and common open source AI models to a network, which then Shoots provides for free or charges for, kind of depending on the plan, to Open Router or to purchasers of inference. And it's at pretty extremely large scale already. So Shoots serves up a major and often the leading portion of inference on Open Router, particularly for open source models. So what does this mean in terms of number? Well, 40 billion tokens per day, kind of mid-2025 figures, scaling to hundreds of billions of tokens daily or trillions per month. And in some cases, Shoots is now surpassing Elon Musk's Grok in terms of volume handled per day. So in addition to providing world-class Open Router volume for free models, there are also paid plans that Shoots provide. And those paid plans for inference are typically 1/6 the cost of any other competitor. So because they're doing things in a subnet fashion, they can severely undercut most of the market competition. And if you think about this is extraordinary. They're at extraordinarily large volume already, and they have extraordinarily less cost that they provide for their paid models. So pretty amazing subnet. Next up is Ridges, Subnet 62. Now, Ridges provides AI-powered coding assistance. So this is the vibe coding platform that we talked about earlier. And they are, in many cases, they are beating Claude and Cursor and many of the other centralized AI vibe coding competitors at the SWE benchmark test and other standardized tests. And their product is about to release wide in the next week or so, their paid version. And they're claiming that they're going to be able to charge 170 TH, the price of anyone else, which again is extraordinary cost savings. And the subnet economics are what allow them to do this with such extreme cost savings. So Targon Subnet 4 is very similar to Shoots in that they provide inference, again, for 1/6 the cost. And they are also serving up free models on Open Router. However, Targon is aiming their product at the enterprise. So they have a trusted execution environment, which means that when you submit a query to their models, it is encrypted and it is not used in any way to further train the model down the road. So your enterprise data is secure at all times. It isn't going out to miners that can read it. So it's a completely secure environment. So combined, Shoots and Targon are powering the bulk or the majority of the free low-cost tiers of inference on Open Router. So already both of these subnets are at scale. So this is pretty extraordinary. Next up, we have Templar Subnet 3, which is a decentralized AI training network. So if you take something like Elon Musk's Colossus data center, which has 200,000 GPUs in it, that is what he uses to train frontier models of Grok. All the major centralized players have the equivalent of, these data centers, which they alone control. There's maybe 4 or 5 entities in the world that have, training centers at this scale. What Templar is attempting to do is create a decentralized version of that. So think of it as a Napsterized, decentralized Colossus. That is what they are attempting. And to date, they have trained a 70 billion parameter model, which is quite a bit less than what Elon and some of the other larger players are doing. It's about 1/300th what Colossus is able to produce. However, they have shown that it is possible, and it was not thought to be possible before Templar achieved this. And very recently, Anthropic's co-founder wrote a paper and tweeted about this extraordinary achievement. The co-founder of Anthropic was looking around to see if anyone had succeeded in creating a decentralized training environment for frontier models. And the largest and the most successful thing that he had found out there out of anyone was Templar. And he mentioned it in the paper and indicated he was extremely interested in what Templar was up to, and please send him more information on it. So that indicates that the centralized players are anticipating a world in which there is a shortage of GPU, in which they will, once you build that 200,000 GPU training data center, where do you go from there if there's just no more GPU available on Earth, right? Somehow you have to do it in a decentralized fashion. And if you think about what Bitcoin did, that is exactly what Bitcoin succeeded at, right? They created in aggregate Earth's largest supercomputer, 500 times larger than anything else. So if you're looking to aggregate GPU, Bitcoin has shown you the way, and Bittensor is the programmable way to do the exact same thing for another purpose. In this case, a decentralized training AI data center. Now, IOTA Subnet 9 is also tackling the same problem, but from a different angle. Instead of high-end powered machines in data centers, they have something called training at home, where all of us with our mere mortal Macs at home can load training at home on our mere mortal machines, and they can all be combined in aggregate in a sort of Napsterized fashion to gang up and create a similar to Templar decentralized network for training very large AI models. IOTA is not aiming to actually compete with the large players, but simply to provide a decentralized training rig for smaller models, but still much larger than what anyone could produce on their own. Synth Subnet 50 is a prediction market, HFT, high frequency trader, and Oracle. And the idea here is to use AI to predict market movements in advance. So, to know the future. And so Synth has turned $3,000 of initial investment into, I think they're up to about 75,000 now, even though at the time of this writing it was 50,000 on Polymarket, and they did that in about 30 days. So they've more than 16x ROI within 45 days or so. Pretty extraordinary results. We don't know yet whether this will scale up, but definitely some early signal here. Nova Subnet 68 is using AI to mine for new pharmaceutical molecules. So it's AI-driven drug discovery. And again, this subnet is in its early days, but they have actually discovered things which were already discovered, thereby proving that their rig, their way of discovering pharmaceutical molecules is legit. It discovered what other labs discovered the hard way by combining chemicals and such. Their training rig will do the same thing. So they have yet to discover a frontier pharmaceutical molecule, but they've proven it's possible. And if they hit one, it could be a multi-billion-dollar discovery, and that would instantly make Subnet 68 extremely valuable. Hippias Subnet 75, I know it says 65 here on the chart. That's an error. We're going to correct it in a future release. It is decentralized storage, largely used for AI data. And so think of something like like a Napster, basically, right? Like decentralized files, a decentralized file system, similar to Filecoin also. But Hippias is sort of a next generation version of these things. And not only is it more performant, and competitive with AWS S3, even to edge computing. They're sort of getting competitive now with being able to serve up files in real time, just as fast as S3 or some of the other CDN networks. Not only that, but they can provide that service at 1/400th to 1/4000th the cost of any competitor. So extreme cost savings. And one of their claims to fame is that there are no egress charges. And what that means is for a lot of these other file service providers, they charge you every time the file leaves the system. Every time they have to serve it up, there's a little charge. There's no charge for it in Hippias. So kind of an extraordinary achievement. Hippias could be a very big subnet down the road. Next up is Score Subnet 44, which is computer vision. So they started off being sort of this money ball for sports thing where the computer vision was applied to a specific vertical, that of, watching soccer matches in Europe. So football, European style, and being able to understand which players and which strategies were working the best. So you can think of this as sort of like an AI computer vision based money ball for sports system. And the idea is that this computer vision system would be able to supply insights which would make the team win more and thereby make the team more valuable. And typically only the largest sporting clubs in the world were able to afford this kind of AI computer vision analysis of their players and strategies. And Subnet 44 Score made the same service available for extraordinarily less cost to smaller sporting clubs. And it has had great success in supplying this product. They've since expanded upon that vision, and they now have multiple computer vision clients, including gas stations all over Europe. So you have like security cameras that are always watching what's going on at the gas station, and speaking up when the AI notices something that looks like trouble. So they've basically secured some contracts with one of Europe's largest gas station conglomerates. And they're every day it seems like they're announcing new revenue producing clients for their product. Zeus Subnet 18 is AI driven extreme precision weather forecasting, and they're basically outperforming industry benchmarks for energy traders. So there are some things like race car weather, right, where if you know exactly with extreme precision within a specific geographic locale what the weather, what the temperature, what the precipitation, what the humidity is going to be, you can win races. You can outperform energy predictions on, for like wind and solar and stuff like that on the market, right? So this high precision weather knowledge is extremely valuable. Zeus is outperforming the regular models that are available for purchase. So there are companies that are very interested in purchasing their weather product. VidAIO, I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced, but VidAIO Subnet 85 is AI video upscaling, compression, and enhancement. So they're basically providing video compression, which is better, and upscaling, which is better quality video, at a fraction of the cost of any of their competitors. Again, Subnet Economics make this possible. They're basically having their Subnet do the bulk of the work on compressing and upscaling the AI video. And this looks like it could be a very big subnet down the road. 404 Gen Subnet 17 is AI text to 3D objects. So, just like when you go to Grok Imagine and you type in something, a description of a picture, and then Grok Imagine makes the picture for you. Imagine doing that text to 3D objects. So you describe what 3D object you want. Maybe it's for a game environment. Maybe it's for something else. And 404 Gen will make that for you. And they're the first Unity plugin for multiple classes of this product. including something they call 2D to 3D, which is instead of a text prompt, you upload a 2D version of the 3D object that you want to make. Maybe it's sneakers, maybe it's something else. And 404 Gen will make the 3D object suitable for usage inside of Unity or one of the other 3D engines, right? So, and because AI is producing the 3D objects, they've amassed Earth's largest library of 3D objects very quickly, right? Just over the last year or so. So they have 25 million 3D objects in their library. Again, Earth's largest. If you're familiar with gaming companies or virtual worlds or that class of company, typically the bulk of the cost of producing these virtual metaverse environments is the creation of the 3D objects. It's just, you had to have human artists doing this. With AI producing 3D objects, if they're high quality, if they're better than, or at least as good as, or better than what human 3D artists are able to do, extremely valuable. 404 Gen could, again, be a very valuable subnet down the road. They do have early signal and they do have early success. Quantum, Subnet 48, has on-demand quantum processing units. So yes, real-world working quantum computers are available on Subnet 48. So these are real quantum circuits and simulators. They do have emulators also. So it's pretty interesting, right? Like, where else can you go and use a quantum computer, just random person at home? Subnet 93 now provides you a way to do it. Think of it like a Schutz or a Targon, but for quantum computers. And finally, Yanez Subnet 54. This is adversarial testing for fraud in KYC systems. So, to put it bluntly, what you're doing as a miner is trying to fake out KYC systems for large banks and crypto institutions. Anyone where there's a KYC process, you're basically trying to make a fake IDs, which can fool the system, right? So you're trying to fool and break into the KYC system, pretending to be a bad actor. And the better job you do at being a Lex Luthor or a Joker, trying to fake out the system, a bad person, a North Korean, part of Lazarus Group or somebody like that, you're basically playing the black hat role here, trying to fool these systems. And the better job you do at your black hat role, the more subnet tokens you own. So it's an adversarial system. That's Yanez Subnet 54. And they then turn around and use that to harden their KYC driver's license analysis software to make it less foolable by these fakes, right? So they do have multi-year contracts with major banks in a 200 billion plus marketplace. So very significant addressable market, very clear business model. Could be an extraordinary subnet down the road also. Okay. So there's 128 of these things. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I did want to give you a sense, since these things are the stars of the show of Bittensor, the subnets are the meat of what's going on here. I wanted to, very early in this report, give you a good sense that these are serious projects and serious people and worth your attention. And remember, all of these companies are currently valuated between 10 million to 100 million in terms of their subnet tokens. So they're, in my opinion, not financial advice, but in my opinion, when you compare them against their real-world non-Bittensor counterparts, they are extraordinarily undervalued. So I believe that this is an extraordinary opportunity. So this is not covered in the Bittensor State of Tao Stillcore report. However, I think it's worth mentioning here. The quality of early investors and participants in the Bittensor ecosystem is extraordinarily high. There are world-class founders and early crypto pioneers who are already significantly invested in Bittensor and who are spending all of their time developing some portion of the Bittensor ecosystem. So at the top of this list is Barry Silbert, who runs Digital Currency Group. He's been extraordinarily vocal about the fact that he believes that Bittensor Tao is the most extraordinary opportunity he's seen since Bitcoin. And Barry Silbert became a Bitcoin billionaire by investing very, very, very early in Bitcoin at scale. And he says this is the thing he's been the most excited about since Bitcoin itself. So that's an extraordinary statement from someone who has had a front row seat to the entire crypto scene for the last 15 years or so. Digital Currency Group and Yuma in particular, he's spending all of his time. He is full time on Bittensor. David Lowy he's a co-founder of Crucible Labs. But previous to that, he spent 20 years at Google. He was their first VP of marketing. He then led their acquisitions group, which acquired over 100 companies, including YouTube and some of the classic Google acquisitions back in the early days. And then he ran Google's VC arm, so he had $7 billion under management. And again, there he invested in hundreds of companies, many of which form the backbone of the internet economy today. And now he is spending all of his time on Bittensor. This is the next very, very large opportunity in his view. And this is someone who's at a front row seat. Again, 20 years at Google. This is a guy who probably knows what he's talking about. Again, we have Aitan Elbaz. He runs Ready. He's the CTO of Ready AI, Subnet 33, and a co-founder. And he previously he created AdSense, which Google acquired and became and that underpins most of Google's revenue and their entire advertising engine. Right, that is what made search profitable, extremely profitable. His invention. He is now spending all of his time on a Bittensor subnet. James Altucher. Also very wealthy guy, became extraordinarily wealthy by betting very early on Bitcoin. He is now full-time on the Bittensor ecosystem as well and very vocal about his enthusiasm for it. And finally, we have Jacob Steves, who is Bittensor's co-founder. He also goes by the online handle Const. You'll find him there on Twitter and Discord and other places as Const. He was a Google AI engineer and an early Bitcoin adopter himself. And he's basically the main figure, the Satoshi, if you will, of the Bittensor ecosystem. Another very high-powered, brainiac kind of guy. So altogether, these, to me, this is extreme high signal when I see these people all independently coming to the same conclusion that Bittensor and Tao is the next great wave. It's the third great coin, if you will, of the crypto ecosystem. We had Bitcoin, then we had Ethereum. I believe, and they believe, that Bittensor Tao is the third great coin in this ecosystem, and it's still very early days. Okay, how is subnet price determined? The chain native subnet AMM. Bittensor contains a native Uniswap-like AMM baked directly into the chain. Now note, this is not an app on top like you would see in Ethereum, right? So Uniswap is an AMM, an automated market maker. That's an application built on top of Ethereum, much as like apps are built on top of OSs. That's not what's going on in Bittensor with the Bittensor AMM. The AMM is the chain. They're the same thing. It's baked in at the chain level. It's not on top. Within this AMM, each subnet has a subnet token, Tao, liquidity pool in this chain native AMM. Now, if you don't know how Uniswap works, this won't make much sense to you, but if you do, this will make complete sense. The price of each subnet token, and thus the subnet market cap, is determined by the current ratio of Tao to subnet tokens in the subnet's liquidity pool. And this works exactly like Uniswap. Now, to get subnet tokens, one needs to stake Tao in this pool. There's no other way to get subnet tokens. I'm lying a little bit because they are emitted to the pools as part of the emissions process. So when the blockchain is continuously throwing off Tao, it is also throwing off subnet tokens. I'm not going to get into the schedule of all that, but just know that I'm lying a little bit. But in general, there is no other way to get subnet tokens. You as a person out there, you must stake Tao, the root token Tao, in order to get subnet tokens, right? So for you, there is no other way. As a miner, you can earn them through emissions. So there is a way to get it if you're mining, but other than that, there is no other way. Now, it is true also that there are wrapped subnet tokens popping up on other chains like Base, Solana, and Ethereum, and you can get them by trading USDC or Tether for wrapped subnet tokens, like wrapped subnet Templar 3. But it's important to note that these wrapped subnet tokens are bridged versions of the original native subnet tokens on Bittensor, which are in turn backed by staked Tao, always. So even though there's wrap versions, there's still, they all must correspond back to versions of the token on the native Bittensor chain that are backed by native Tao on the native chain. Okay. Now, this is important because Bittensor is geared to always have subnets drive value back into the base Tao token. Very important. Again, very unlike Ethereum or Solana or really anything else. Okay, let's talk about the state of Tao wallets. Now, over the last 4 years, Bittensor wallets have been, kind of like early Bitcoin or Ethereum wallets, pretty ganky, not consumer ready, difficult for consumers, probably not difficult for you and me, person watching this, if you're crypto savvy. But even if you are crypto savvy, it's still hard. It's still too hard for most crypto savvy people. If you're like a MetaMask person, if you're a Phantom on Solana person, these early Bittensor wallets were too hard generally, even for you. So that resulted in an insular, closed trading environment for subnet tokens. Only the Bittensor intelligentsia were able to comprehend these early wallets, and thus were the only ones able to trade. And that was true through most of 2025. It was roughly the same 20,000 or so participants all trading against each other for the last year. So sort of a zero-sum game. The total subnet market cap has hovered around $1 billion for most of 2025. And why is that? Well, no new money was entering, right? So it was just all of us trading against our friends. Now that just changed at the end of December. 2 new Tao wallets were released in December that have made Bittensor truly accessible to consumers for the very first time. So first up, we have Crucible Labs Tao wallet. It has an excellent UI and directly supports the Ledger hardware wallet. So you could use Ledger. It was sort of convoluted. I won't get into how, using sort of the ganky old wallets that Bittensor had. But the Crucible wallet is the first one that's consumer ready. And if you're a consumer that's used to using a Ledger with your MetaMask or whatever, this will work for you. You'll understand this immediately. Now, at the moment, it's only a Chrome plugin, so you have to use it on a desktop. But then along came Tao.com. And they also have a new great consumer-ready wallet, and this one is an iOS wallet, so it's for your phone. And it goes a step further. Users on the Tao.com wallet on your phone, on your iOS phone, you can buy Tao with a credit card or Apple Pay directly in-app. So new money can enter the ecosystem for consumers for the very first time. Users can then use that Tao to buy and sell subnet tokens directly within the wallet app. Now, that means that everything a consumer needs to participate in Bittensor subnets now exists in one app. The exchange for Tao and subnets plus fiat on-ramps are all baked in. There is no need to get a Coinbase or Kraken account or use a website of any kind. Everything you need is in that one Tao.com app, which is amazing. So that's, so here's what it looks like. You can go find it in the iOS App Store. So great on-ramps now exist. Consumers can buy subnets easily. Now, the last piece that's missing from this is that consumers don't know why they should buy subnets. Now, maybe you do, because you just watched my speech on what all the subnets are doing, and you heard me say that the subnet valuations are, roughly 10 million to 100 million, with most of them sort of in the $2 to $10 million ranges, which means that there are, like, if you compare the market caps of those subnets to their real world non-Bittensor counterparts, they are incredibly, incredibly, incredibly lower valued. I don't want to say undervalued because that's in the eye of the beholder. This is not financial advice. But yes, in my opinion, these things are insanely undervalued. You have something like Ridges, which is beating Cursor and Claude at the SWE benchmark test and is 1/70th the cost with their upcoming product. And its market cap is roughly around $50 million right now, whereas Cursor and Claude and all these other things are multiple tens or hundreds of billions with a B dollars. Yes, I would say there's a big delta between the two of them. So it's true. It is true that Ridges does not yet have the, it doesn't have the market penetration, but you can see how the potential does appear to be there, and they do appear to have some very significant traction right before product launch. Okay, so subnets in 2026. If consumers have the ability to enter with new money and they know why they should enter with new money, it stands to reason that they will enter with new money and they will start participating in this ecosystem, right? So what could kick this off? Well, what example do we have of something sort of like this? Well, we do have an example, and that's the ICO phase of Ethereum in 2016. So 10 years ago, a decade ago. Right. And it was kicked off by 2 early breakout successes. There was something called the DAO around April or May of 2016. And it, more or less overnight raised around 150 million, becoming the largest crowdfunding ever at the time and demonstrated massive potential, right? So this had never happened before. Nobody knew that this could happen. They just sort of opened the front door and said, anybody that wants to give us some of their Ethereum, we'll give you a share of the DAO, and we'll give it to you as tokenized shares. So the world kind of went, oh my God, this can happen. We didn't know this could happen. And Ethereum was like, if I remember right, it was like around $12 or something like that at the time. Then along came Gollum in November of 2016, and they raised 8.6 million in under 30 minutes. So it sold out basically super fast. It was one of the most highly hyped, fast-selling ERC20 ICOs, and that set the precedent. So now people are like, okay, it happened twice. We should just start doing this, right? So by early 2017, projects were no longer raising money from VCs. Brave raised $35 million in seconds, and others piled in after them. And when this happened, when the ICO craze happened, the demand for Ethereum spiked rapidly. It went from like $12, to around $4,500 at its peak. Why did it spike like that? Well, because you needed Ethereum to participate in these ICOs. It was the coin of the realm. There was no other way to participate, right? So here at Stillcore, we suspect, not financial advice, just our opinion, we suspect that we will see one or more breakout subnets in 2026. What does that mean exactly? Well, we think at least one subnet token by itself will reach a market cap of $1 billion, right? So the highest one right now is around 100 million. So that's like a 10x jump. So can that happen? I think it can. When that happens, if it happens, but I'm going to say if it happens, the attention of Crypto X will likely swing onto the entire Bittensor ecosystem. People will start asking, just like they did with the Ethereum ICO phase, are there more of these things, meaning subnets? How many more can also get to 1 billion? If that occurs, the demand for Tao, we think, will spike rapidly. Why? Again, because you need Tao to get subnet tokens. It's the only way to get them, right? You need Tao. Tao is the coin of the realm. And overnight, we'll have traders from Ethereum and Solana, where not a lot's going on at the moment, looking for a Tao wallet that mirrors the ease of use of Phantom or MetaMask. And now what's different as of December, as of just in the last 30 days, what's different now is that consumer quality Bittensor wallets are ready and waiting for these people when they arrive. And that is a very new dynamic. So what will cause one of these subnets to blast up to $1 billion? Well, we've seen a similar fractal repeat many times throughout compu history. Some have called this phenomenon the bazaar versus the cathedral. And usually the bazaar wins over the closed, large, and centralized, the cathedral, eventually, almost every time. So some examples of this, well, back when I was a youngin', like most of you watching, we didn't have the internet. We had AOL, we had CompuServe, we had Prodigy. These were big centralized online services. They were not the internet, and you had to log into them, and they were very separate. They didn't really talk to each other. Then along came the open, decentralized alternative based on TCP/IP and the World Wide Web. And, as we all know, that is eventually what won. It was the bazaar, and it beat the large and centralized cathedrals. We also had the operating system wars. Linux, well, at the time we had Microsoft NT, we had IBM OS2, we had Sun OS, and what won? Well, the open source, free, decentralized alternative, Linux, right? Nope. And back then, I was in those days, that was not who you thought was going to win. It was not obvious that Linux was going to win that war. Linux powers our world today. Within AI, you saw PyTorch and TensorFlow win out versus the proprietary AI frameworks. On the handheld device front, you saw Android win versus Apple iOS, right? In terms of mobile OS market share, Android has something like 85%. I think it's actually even higher now of the market share versus Apple's iOS. We all think iOS is the big winner, but really it was Android. And Bitcoin versus fiat. Now that's still unfolding, but Bitcoin has certainly put a dent in fiat. No question about that. Despite being dead 50 times over, despite the doubters, it always comes back, right? So, but the lesson is pretty clear. You can't fight the whole world. Open source movements typically attract the best minds from all over the world to contribute. But usually the whole world has to be galvanized, motivated, and coordinated, right? With Linux, it was, I don't want to pay Microsoft, right? So I'm going to help out and build this free alternative. With TCP/IP and the World Wide Web, it was, I don't want to have to ask Prodigy or CompuServe for permission, right? I just want to put up a website. I want to do what I want. I don't want them telling me no, right? So within Bittensor, that organizing principle or incentive layer is an ownership layer. You can imagine if you could own TCP/IP. Imagine if you could own Linux. Imagine if you could own, you could own Bitcoin. So that was actually the first example where there was an ownership layer. So Bitcoin provided the first ownership layer, and that showed, it worked pretty well. Emitting tokens to those who contributed the best, the most, and the earliest, right? If you contributed early to Bitcoin, you tended to get them, you tended to get a lot more. You got hundreds of them, maybe, right? Maybe thousands, when they were like $7 a Bitcoin, right? So if you contribute early, that's incredibly valuable, and you hang on, obviously, as well. But those early workers became fabulously wealthy, right? So the world now better understands how this kind of thing can work thanks to Bitcoin. And yes, I'm quoting Barry Silbert. Bittensor subnets are open source startups. Anyone can join one of these startups and become a miner. And anyone can invest in them by buying subnet tokens. When the whole world competes, you get this insanely efficient product creation engine. You have Earth's smartest workers. They recruit themselves. They work much faster because they work 24/7. There's not a day off. Every block, the subnets never sleep. Bittensor never sleeps. They work much cheaper because they're working for subnet tokens. They're not getting paid. There's no HR department. There's no agreements. There's no invoices. There's no payroll. And, like we said, Bitcoin amassed Earth's largest supercomputer doing this. The same dynamic is at play here. And so that's why, so we think it can work again. We think that's the dynamic that's at play here. So let's look at a specific subnet case study, Ridge's Subnet 62. Now, as I said earlier, this is the vibe coding subnet that's competing with Claude and Cursor. Miners can earn as much as 50K worth of Subnet 62 tokens per day. So that's sort of like getting 50K worth of equity in a startup at a $50 million valuation, right? For one day's work, right? Remember that. It's only one day's work. You have to be the best. You have to win. You have to be, those winner take all in their contest. The contests are all different, but theirs is winner take all, but it can be done. So the competitors of Ridges have much larger market caps. Cursor was last valued at, 29.3 billion, Cognition Labs at 10.2 billion, Anthropic at 183 billion. So let's just say Ridges were to match Cognition's market cap, right? So, and that's 102 billion. So it goes from 50 million to 102 billion. That's a 204x jump. So that would make your original 50K investment, right, in subnet tokens that you earned mining for a single day's work, that would be worth $10.2 million if you held on, right, through that jump. So that's why these miners are working so hard. It's the same reason why early Bitcoin miners furiously mined as much early Bitcoin as they could manage. This is why, if you're a miner, why are you donating electricity? Why are you donating GPU? This is why. Okay, so how do the economics look from the subnet's point of view? So the cost of production via subnet is significantly cheaper, as we've seen, but is the quality the same or better than that of centralized competitors? So we've already mentioned that Ridges has surpassed all competitors on the SWE benchmark test, and their price is 1/70th the cost of competitors. So how are they doing this, right? Well, Ridges is roughly one half the cost of most direct competitors like Claude Pro or Cursor Pro, and 1/10 or less compared to the high tier plans for power users, right? And this is likely where their 1/70th cost claim comes into play. So a lot of these vibe coding platforms, if you become a heavy user, they start charging you extra, and that can add up. I know people that are spending $5,000-$10,000 a month on vibe coding just because they just keep using it, right? And they're addicted to it, and they're wealthy, so they're just paying it, right? So imagine if you didn't have to pay that, right? What if you got the same product for quite a bit less? These people are pretty mercenary. Some number of them will likely switch over to Ridges, I think. Because they're using miners, that's one way in which they're able to shave their costs insanely. But the other way is that Ridges uses other subnets to provide their inference. So under the hood, Ridges is using Targon Subnet 4 and Shoots Subnet 64 to power their inference. So what does that mean? Well, that means Ridges pays Targon and Shoots 1/6 the cost for inference versus competitors, right? Since that is the price Targon and Shoots can offer versus their competitors. So you got subnets using subnets. And this is a phenomenon I call subnet stacking. And this allows subnet savings to be multiplicative. Subnets naturally produce lower cost products, But when subnets leverage other subnets, these lower costs compound. And we're seeing subnet stacking more and more and more and more within subnets. Not because of Tao Keiretsu loyalty, but because using anything else just doesn't make as much sense economically. All right, now let's do a little dive on the Bittensor macro scene here. So the state of the centralized exchanges. So the base Bittensor coin Tao is available on several centralized exchanges, including Coinbase, Binance, and Kraken, and most major exchanges. But it's oddly missing from Gemini. I got to talk to the Winklevi about that. I don't know why the Winklevi are resisting it. Hopefully they'll have it. I love Gemini. So my hope is that they will see this and they will put it on Gemini. But these exchanges serve as the primary hub at the moment for fiat to Tao transactions. That's where most people are getting their Tao. But subnet tokens are largely not listed on centralized exchanges. So you can't just go to a centralized exchange and get Ridges. You can't go to Coinbase and get Templar, right? Just it doesn't exist. Now, there's some exceptions to this. Hippias Subnet 55, Hippias Subnet 75, Liam Subnet 51, and Shoots Subnet 64 are all listed on MEXC. But as far as I can tell, that's it. There's no other subnet tokens on any other centralized exchanges. So it is generally impossible today for consumers to buy subnets on centralized exchanges. All right. Now, the state of the DEXs, the decentralized exchanges. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there is only one DEX in the entire Bittensor ecosystem, and that's the baked-in chain-native Uniswap-like DEX on the Bittensor native chain. It doesn't really have a name, as it is the chain, but it is sometimes referred to as the Subnet AMM. The Subnet AMM currently does $28 million in trading volume daily. It is also by far the deepest pool of liquidity for subnet tokens, and it's here that subnet prices are determined. Okay, now let's talk about the Tao halving. So on December 15th, 2025, so, roughly a month ago, Bittensor had its first halving. So Bittensor has the exact same economics as Bitcoin by design, and this includes a halving at roughly 4-year intervals. So the daily block rewards for miners and subnets was reduced from 7,200 Tao per day to 3,600 Tao per day that it's emitting every day. So Bitcoin's first halving occurred in November of 2012. Bitcoin price that day was $12.38. Oh my God, for a time machine, right? 1 year later, on November 28th, 2013, the price was $1,031.95. So this was a 83x increase over a year from its halving. Tao was already at $300 or so when its first halving occurred. It had previously reached $777 as an all-time high. Already out of the gate, Bittensor's price at its first halving is already bigger than that of Bitcoin, right? So it's already doing better, which is kind of amazing. Now, nobody knows exactly what the halving will do to Bittensor's price, but if Bitcoin is the comparable, and remember it experienced 83x, so I'm not going to, let's not say 83x, but let's suggest a 10x or 20x over 2026 is possible. That would put Tao's price between $3,000 per Tao and $6,000 per Tao, which again sort of feels like very early days of Bitcoin, kind of, circa 2013, 2014 or so. Okay, so now let's talk about Tao Flow. In the last month, a pretty significant upgrade was introduced to the Bittensor ecosystem called Tao Flow. Now, Tao Flow reimagined the mechanism by which subnets compete with each other. So previous to Tao Flow, the way in which subnets competed with each other was basically price, right? Basically, the market cap of the subnet determined, whoever had the biggest market cap. So if you were that subnet that had the $100 million market cap, you got the most Tao emissions. You got the lion's share of the emissions of that 3,600 Tao that the chain was emitting every day, right? You got most of it, or your subnet did. But what happened? But this was sort of flawed. What this allowed was early winners, right? So if you were one of the early subnets that amassed that $100 million market cap, you could just kind of sit there and not do much. You had the most liquidity, so it was harder to move your price. So this sort of liquidity aristocracy arose, and inertia supplied these, high market cap subnets with a moat, which is the inverse, which is not what Bittensor is supposed to be doing, right? It's supposed to be continuously reevaluating everyone always. So what Tao Flow did is it reimagined that mechanism. And it basically said it's not based on market cap anymore. It's based on the Tao that is flowing into the subnet's liquidity pool on the AMM. So, and it's over sort of a 30-day window. So whoever's got the most heat, whoever's got the most, action, the most positive flow of Tao in exchange for subnet tokens, the more interest you have, the more buying activity you have for your subnet token over a 30-day period. That's who gets the highest percentage of the 3,600 new Tao that's being produced every day. So who has the heat? Who has the current attention? Feed that fire. Double down on what's working and make it real time. What you did yesterday doesn't matter, right? So conversely, if you have negative Tao flow, that is, if more Tao is leaving your liquidity pool on the AMM than is coming in, the chain will cut you off entirely. You will get zero new Tao. So if you get negative Tao flow, you get nothing, right? You get wonked. You get nothing. Good day, sir, right? It's that whole thing. So your miners, and that means your miners get zero Tao. So all these people that are burning electricity in GPU, they starve. You starve. That's bad, right? So, and if your subnet has negative Tao flow for too long, the Bittensor chain will deregister your subnet. It will effectively repossess it. So, the chain is subsidizing all this great stuff for you and allowing you to, offer products at 1/10 the cost of competitors. So it's very generous, but it is also, if you're not pulling your weight, it is also savage and merciless. It's always, 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 always cutting the dead weight. It's looking around to see who the weakest link is, and it's killing them with Terminator mechanical precision. Competition. I hear people asking me about competition all the time. And I always hate this answer usually when somebody else gives it to me, but it's the truest answer I can give, so I'm just going to give it. At this time, Bittensor does not have a true competitor. Bittensor was fair launch, just like Bitcoin, right? So and that's extremely hard to pull off. A lot of people don't understand how hard that is to do. It hasn't happened very often. It's crazy hard to do. And it now, because it's 4 years old, that now serves as a significant moat. And it's one that I don't think could be replicated today. You'd have to catch up on 4 years worth of momentum in the Bittensor ecosystem. And you'd have to have 4 years of a fair launch, right? Because when you fairly launch something, there's no coins. So you have to boot them up out of nothing, out of thin air, right? There's day one of Bitcoin, right? Where nobody has any Bitcoin. The chain produces its first block and the first miners get the first Bitcoin. And even then, nobody really has very much. And it's not worth very much. It's worth less than a penny, right? So that's day one. And you have to kind of wait you have to be patient, wait for it to boot up. If you can get through that boot up period, you have an incredibly valuable commodity that almost nobody else has. I'm not aware of another chain that's booted up like this. Other than like Litecoin or some of the coins which just copied Bitcoin's coin and Dogecoin that are kind of a joke, right? There hasn't been another serious project since Bitcoin which has managed to pull off a fair launch. It's all stuff like Solana or Ethereum, which had ICOs in many cases with VCs getting 60%, 80% of the coins, right? So that world does not leave the same opportunity. It's not trusted as much, right? So that's the other thing. People trust Bittensor. It is truly neutral because it was fairly launched. No one entity owns more of the 1% of the Tao in circulation. And that means, amazingly, that Bittensor was even more fairly launched than Bitcoin. Creator Satoshi Nakamoto owns roughly 5.5% of the supplies. Now, it is true that Satoshi had to mine for it. He participated in a fair launch, but still, Satoshi owns 5.5% of the supply, right? No one entity owns more than 1% of the Tao in circulation. So that means it was even more fairly launched than Bitcoin itself. That in itself is incredibly valuable and probably not as well understood as it should be. Now, there are a number of competitors who are sort of adjacent. They're not doing the same thing, but they are sort of quasi-competitors. They're sort of things that have sort of taped themselves together that are cosmetically similar. But if you go through any of these things, you dig down into them. They're not the same thing. But I have listed them in the paper. I'm not going to actually spend a lot of time here on going through each one of these. but just, know that they exist and they are listed in the paper. So this is also something which is not in the report, but I'm going to highlight it here in this video version of the report. I get the question a lot, from AI people usually, why use a blockchain? Like, why do crypto at all, right? Number of reasons. So first, the chain is the way in which we provide consensus in these contests over which worker did the best. There's something inside the blockchain called UMA consensus, and it's sort of fuzzy consensus, and it allows us to basically electronically but fuzzily decide on which worker provided the highest quality output, and it can do so very reliably. This UMA consensus works extraordinarily well. And just like the Bitcoin blockchain has its own consensus algorithm, which allows it to figure out the order of, which transactions are legitimate and the order in which they occurred. So too does a blockchain provide consensus on which worker did the best. And you really do need a blockchain to do that. Second reason, like Bitcoin, the chain is what pays the workers. So this is what allows us to live in a world without employees, without contractors, without contracts for the workers, without invoices. You want that payment to be immediately. We want people to get dopamine hits right away when they do something good, when they win one of these contests. So the chain pays the workers. And we also want the chain, frankly, to subsidize the growth of Bittensor the same way the Bitcoin chain subsidized the growth of Bitcoin itself, right? The reason why miners donated electricity and CPU was so that they could get paid. And they got paid in terms of Bitcoin by the Bitcoin chain itself. Bitcoin subsidized its own boot up sequence, its own growth through handing out early Bitcoins. This is what Bittensor does. It imitates what Bitcoin did exactly. And for that, you need a blockchain and you need a token. Third reason, like Bitcoin, you get global workers. So we want the best talent. We want the most high powered and the most GPU from everywhere on Earth. And we want we want the brains and the GPU 24/7. And, a blockchain helps you to do that, right? There's no organization that has to coordinate all those people. It's all permissionless. It's all automated. And the blockchain takes care of making it fair and permissionless and trusted. Fourth, you want the workers to get ownership in the future success of the subnets to which they contribute. And again, that requires tokens. That requires subnet tokens. So that's why you need a blockchain. Fifth, subnets compete via token price. So the way in which we decide which subnets are going to get newly minted Tao from the chain. We need pricing for the subnet tokens in order for the chain to know which subnets are the most highly valued. And of course, for that, you need tokens, right? So for the tokens, you need a blockchain. So sixth reason why you need a blockchain. Seventh, the weakest subnets are auto-killed by the chain. And you want this to be deterministic and fair. When subnets or miners or validators are not performing, you want the chain to be able to come along and, kick them out of the network or greatly reduce their influence over the network. Again, you need a blockchain to do that fairly and to enforce it. So the blockchain aligns incentives perfectly, and if not perfectly, as close as human beings can come to perfectly. There's no other way to do all of this. There is no other way to do all these things we just described, and there's no other way to automate them, and there's no other way to ensure that they're completely fair and available worldwide, and that there's no bias, there's no organization, there's no lag time in there. Really, a blockchain is the only way to practically do all of this. Bitcoin proved that it was doable and that it, in fact, is the model for doing something like this. Okay, let's talk now about crossing the chasm, and that's what the chasm looks like for those who have never seen this before. So the idea of crossing the chasm is that new ideas go through this, kind of 0 to 1 phase where, you spend a lot of time in the desert screaming like a crazy prophet about something that's coming, like the internet, like Bitcoin, where most people think you're dumb and don't think you're correct. And at some point you sort of, you scream long enough and you get enough true believers that you reach some critical mass, and all of a sudden the chain reaction happens and you go from kind of nowhere to kind of everywhere overnight, right? And it looks like an overnight success, and that's called crossing the chasm when you do that, right? So at this time, Bittensor subnets, there is no one subnet which has truly crossed the chasm, right? There's no subnet that has $1 billion valuation, that is clearly dominating its category. It's the number one, vendor in its category. That hasn't happened yet. It is true that there's a lot of early success in Signal, but no subnet has truly yet achieved true breakaway success. Now, at Stillcore, we believe, just our opinion, not financial advice, but this is what we believe, there are currently 10 to 20 subnets with breakout potential. So we think there are some in here, in this pack, 10 to 20 out of 128 that could potentially be, number one in their category. And we think 3 to 4 of them are pretty close. And we will further predict that at least one subnet will cross the chasm in a big way in 2026. When that happens, if it happens, a lot of new interest and investment into Tao will suddenly appear. And not just from crypto people, but from AI and other economic sectors, like exactly what happened with Ethereum. So, but it's, this is not without a risk. This is not a proven thesis yet. We do know that subnets can make backends that surpass centralized, well-funded competitors, but we do not yet know if subnet teams can productize and market products. We don't know whether they can generate breakout revenue, and we don't know whether consumer crypto participants will find their way to subnets and understand and value them appropriately. So our conclusion at Stillcore, look, Bittensor is the most ferocious form of capitalism. I'll say it again. And when you abstract everything away, Bittensor is about adding an ownership layer and aligning incentives in a decentralized environment. And this effectively, it creates a new form of capitalism. And we think it's the most ferocious form of capitalism. Whole companies and whole departments can be atomized. They can be broken down into their component pieces and reassembled in the image of Bitcoin's incentivism. And this allows worldwide freelancers and GPU to dip in and out of subnets as miners, win contests to earn the subnet tokens, and own interest in the future of that subnet. And at the same time, the company pays only for the value it receives. It is heavily subsidized by the Bittensor blockchain's emissions. And as a result, it gets better product faster, almost for free. It's a great deal for both sides, just like Bitcoin was. And together, this creates a wickedly efficient new vehicle for value creation. And today, most subnets are AI related in some way. Once the subnet cap is lifted, and we can have more than 128 subnets, we think we'll likely see an explosion of new ideas in subnets. Bittensor is a Y Combinator that anyone can join, as our friends at Unsupervised Capital recently put it in their really excellent The Investment Case for Bittensor report, which I suggest you read after you read our report. But I do love their report as well. It just sort of takes it's a different view of the same phenomenon. And we agree, and we're betting on it. So this has been the special edition of Hash Rate covering the State of Tao by Stillcore Capital report, January 2026. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you'll read it. Hope you'll spread it around. My name is Mark Jeffrey. We'll see you next time.